Well guys, the day is finally here. The Nintendo Switch 2 has arrived, and in this video we're going to be unboxing it and giving some first impressions on this next generation system from Nintendo. Here we have an ultra high-speed HDMI cable to play the Switch on your TV. We have the AC adapter. You're gonna need this to plug the console in and charge it. And here is the Nintendo Switch 2 dock. It's important to note that this dock will only work with Nintendo Switch 2. It will not work with the original Switch, and vice versa. Here's a comparison of the Switch OLED dock compared to the new Switch 2 dock. On the Switch 2 dock, there are two USB 2.0 ports on the side. Yes, it's a little bit disappointing that it's not USB 3, but what are you gonna do? You also have your Ethernet port for connecting a LAN cable and for wired internet. This is also on the OLED dock, but not on the original Switch dock. And of course, you have a port for HDMI connection. The Switch 2 dock is 0.84 pounds, which is not very heavy, although it is 0.12 pounds heavier than the Switch OLED dock. Next, let's check out the new Joy-Con 2 controllers. These controllers have about 20 hours of battery life and charge in about 3.5 hours. One of the biggest changes is that these controllers have a new C button, which will open GameChat, which I will not be using. Okay, maybe I'll use it a couple of times, but probably just for testing. The new Joy-Cons are larger than the old Joy-Cons, which is a welcome improvement for people with big hands. Although it's too early to tell if Joy-Con drift will be an issue, it seems like it probably won't be based on all of the feedback Nintendo has received and implemented into these new controllers. Unlike the original Joy-Cons, these controllers attach magnetically, which is actually pretty cool. There's also a new mouse mode functionality where you can use these controllers like a mouse, but we'll check that out in a later video, probably with my Switch 2 Welcome Tour review. The Switch 2 Joy-Cons are noticeably heavier than the original Joy-Cons, about 0.6 ounces heavier, but it's not that big of a deal, and actually they feel a little bit more comfortable than the original Joy-Cons in my hands. Of course, we also have the new Joy-Con straps, which I'll probably never use, and also the Joy-Con grip controller, which honestly I never actually used much on the original Switch either. That's because I like to use the Switch Pro controller, which we'll be covering in an upcoming review. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss every video we're going to make on the Nintendo Switch 2, and believe me, there's going to be a lot. Finally, we have the next generation console itself, the Nintendo Switch 2, and yes, it is noticeably larger than the Switch OLED and of course the original Switch. Take a look at these comparisons. The console weighs 0.88 pounds or 1.18 pounds with the Joy-Con attached to the system. This is slightly heavier than the Switch OLED, which weighed 0.71 pounds without the Joy-Cons and 0.93 pounds with the Joy-Cons. Of course, a lot of the added weight can be contributed to the bigger screen. The Switch 2 has a 7.9-inch LCD screen versus the Switch OLED's 7-inch OLED screen. The original Switch only had a 6.2-inch LCD screen, but it had pretty big bezels, which made it look larger than it actually was. Unfortunately, the Switch 2 does have some bezels, but they're not anywhere near as noticeable as the original Switch. Unlike the Switch and the Switch OLED, which topped out at 720p resolution, the Switch 2 screen features a 1080p HDR10 variable refresh rate screen. What does this mean? Well, the screen looks pretty good for an LCD screen. Unfortunately, it's not better than the OLED screen, but this is pretty obvious. LCD will never look as good as OLED, especially an LCD screen that is not mini LED, but at least this screen will have 120 frames per second support. Unlike the Switch and Switch OLED, this device has two USB-C ports on the top and the bottom. This might be useful for accessories and for charging, but we'll have to test that in our full review. Likewise, we'll be testing the new speakers in our full review as well. well. The device has a 5,220 milliamp hour battery, which will only give you about 2 to 6 hours of battery life. But again, we'll have to test that in the real world. Of course, you have a power button and a microphone that Nintendo is claiming will cancel out noise from around your room. In my experience, small little microphones don't really do a good job, but we'll be testing this out with GameChat. In a rather courageous move, Nintendo has kept the 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as added a headphone jack to their new Pro controller. We'll be covering that in our Switch 2 Pro controller review coming up later. There's also the MicroSD express card slot, which yes, will not work with your old MicroSD cards for storing games. You'll need to buy a MicroSD express card up to 2 terabytes, and yes, they are faster, but they're also more expensive. Luckily, Nintendo has increased the internal storage from 64 gigabytes on the OLED Switch and 32 gigabytes on the original Switch, all the way up to 256 gigabytes. This should thankfully be enough for at least a year or two for most gamers. There is also the game card slot, which is compatible with older Switch game cards and also Nintendo Switch 2 game cards, obviously. In terms of how the console feels compared to the OLED and OG Switch, it's obvious that the Switch 2 is a little bit more premium in the hand. It just feels like a better device, which makes sense from a sequel console that they originally wanted to call the Super Nintendo Switch. Now, is it $450 worth of premium? That's up to you to decide. I happen to have a Steam Deck OLED, which I can compare for you guys if you would like that. Leave a comment if you'd like to see a comparison between the Steam Deck and the Nintendo Switch 2. Turning on the console, you'll see that the menus are a little bit more refined than the original Switch, but they're no doubt disappointing compared to the Wii and the Wii U menus, not to mention the 3DS and its extensive theme library. When is Nintendo going to add more themes? Well, if the original Switch is any indication, never. I'm also sad to report that there is no music playing in any of the menus, and not even the eShop, which is unfortunately no surprise given that the original Switch also didn't have any music, unlike the Wii U, Wii, and 3DS. We'll be reviewing the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware in full in a later video, so again, make sure to subscribe for that. In the meantime, what do you guys think of the Nintendo Switch 2? Are you excited about the bigger and better screen, the improved graphics, or the mouse functionality on the Joy-Cons? Let me know your favorite feature in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. We'll be making videos about everything Nintendo Switch 2, the Joy-Cons, the GameCube controller, the microSD cards, and of course the games like Mario Kart World coming up very soon. We'll end this video with some more footage, and we'll see you next time.